Welcome students. Now we will see the production process. Industrial sociology is concerned with the problems of contemporary industry. Knowledge about the traditional process of production will help us to acquire a broad basic view of the subject. To understand the development of social system in modern industry, it is necessary to distinguish the formal relations of production and social relations at work. Formal relations of production. The formal social relationships of production result from the socially defined rights of individuals to have access to the means of making a living and to a share in the result of the productive process. Thus, in a primitive society based on agriculture, the right to till fertile land and to share in the products of agriculture is dependent on membership in a certain family. The formal social relations of production in such a society coincide with the social relationships of the family. This means, for instance, that the head of the family has the same type of obligation toward and expectations from subordinate family members in the economic sphere as he has in other spheres. In the guild system, the putting out system and the factory system, each similarly specify the terms under which individuals may enter the productive process and the rights to a share in its results. As a result, there are certain types of formal social relationships peculiar to each system. Social relations at work. By social relations at work, on the other hand, is meant those social relationships into which men enter by virtue of their association in a cooperative process of production. These social relations at work are apt to be determined most directly by the technology and division of labor of a productive process. For instance, where tools are used in the productive process, men from one type of relationship, where machines are used, other types of social relationships occur. As compared with the formal relations, the social relations are more often a direct or primary character involving face to face contacts. These two types of relationships are connected to each other in a variety of ways. First, the formal social relationships of production and social relationships of work involve the same or different individuals depending on the nature of the productive system. Thus, in a simple agricultural society, the two types of social relationships are almost always combined. Not only is one obligated to work for one's father, but one generally works with one's father in the productive process. On the other hand, in the industrial system, the formal social relations of production are rarely combined with social relations at work. The working man may never know or meet the people for whom he works. Second, although a given type of formal social relationship in the productive process tends to create a given set of social relationships in the work situation. Actually, The two often vary independently. The social relationships between the men in a steel mill are very different from those between the men on an assembly line. Yet all these workers are subject to the same set of formal social relationships of production. Third, as a rule, the formal social relations of production change much less rapidly and frequently than social relationships at work. However, one type of relationship should not be studied to the exclusion of the other. Both of them must be considered in an analysis of industry. The following types of systems were found in the socio-economic organization of society prior to industrialization: the manorial or feudal system, the guild system, and the domestic or putting out system. The manorial system. The manorial system prevailed in Europe from about 9th to 12th century. The manors consisted of a vast extension of arable land ruled over by the feudal lord. The tenants of the lord cultivated the lands. The manors were self-contained units made up of cultivators and few tradesmen, artisans and blacksmiths. Almost everything needed for sustenance are produced and the surplus was exchanged. The labourers were required to devote a part of their time to cultivate the lord's fields and were given a part of their products. They also serve in their army in exchange for military protection. The lords were frequently at war among themselves or for the king whose lands they were keeping. The rise of the towns in the 11th century freed the serfs. Feudal system gradually lost its existence with the emergence of guild system. The guild system. The guild system flourished in Europe in 13th century. The term guild is usually taken to mean an organization of the workers in a special crafts like carpenters, weavers, goldsmiths, ironmongers, etc. What distinguishes a guild from similar organization such as craft unions is that a guild includes all the members of a given vocation, employees and employed alike. There were two types of guilds, merchant guilds and craft guilds. The former were meant to protect the interest of the merchants, but tried also to keep the monopoly of trade by organizing among themselves and bringing pressure to bear upon the rulers of place. The craft guilds were the more important of the two, bringing together the men engaged in the same occupation. The guild had two principal aims which contrast sharply with the aims of our own industrial system. First, the guild tried to preserve equality. Technological change was strictly prohibited. Techniques were minutely regulated, even to the specification of the tools that could be employed, the number of apprentices and journeymen that each master might employ, and the level of wages and hours. Access to raw material and sold it to the masters, thereby preventing wealthier master from securing a monopoly of raw material. The second aim of the guild system was to maintain its economic position in society. In order to maintain employment, the guilds decreed that work must take the longest possible course. Work was not divided among guild members on the basis of technical specialization. For instance, the guild clothing worker did not specialize on a particular process such as spinning, weaving or dyeing. Rather, one worker would be engaged solely in the manufacture of costs, another in the manufacture of hose, and so on. Prices were regulated and the sale of goods made by outsiders was prohibited. In order to control competition, the guilds strove to make membership in the guilds compulsory. They also strove to gain a monopoly of their crafts in a given area. The relative success of the guilds in enforcing these practices was the outcome of existing economic, social and political conditions. The guilds produced mainly the necessities of life for limited, stable and therefore predictable market. For this reason, prices and methods of manufacture could be controlled. Finally, the guilds received considerable help from medieval town governments in enforcing guild regulations. Turning now to the internal social structure of the guilds, the most important formal social relationships existed among three classes of members: masters, apprentices and journeymen. The masters were the managers or controllers of the guild system. Their relation to the productive process, however, differed widely from those of the modern industrial manager or owner. Theoretically, at least the master had achieved his position not by investing capital or by appointment, but by moving up a ladder of skill and through seniority. As a result of all these factors, his relations to his workers, particularly the apprentices, differed widely from the relation of the modern industrial manager to his hired hands. The apprentice was usually a young worker who was bound over to serve a master for a period ranging from 3 to 7 years. The relation between master and apprentice involved certain definite rights and job obligations on the part of both. Training in the skills of the craft along with the responsibility of disciplining him is the prime obligation of the master. The apprentice owed certain duties to his master: obedience, self-control, loyalty, honesty, good conduct. In general, the bond between master and apprentice was of the closest description. The master stood in loco parentis to the apprentice. When an apprentice finished his term of service, he became a journeyman. Journeyman was a fully qualified worker who for some reason did not or could not become a master, and who secured his livelihood by working at wages for a master. Ideally, the journeyman stage was the bridge between the highest and lowest rungs of the occupation ladder. The formal relations of production were enforced by the guild itself. In many guilds, an assembly composed of all the men in the guild met annually, drew up regulations and appointed officials to administer them. These officials, often called wardens, usually held office for a year and were given a power to dispense judgment and to punish wrongdoers. In this way, disputes between apprentice, journeyman and master were adjusted within the framework of the formal organization. The social relations of work depend primarily on the division of labor and on the type of technology. In this system, labor was divided on the basis of the total product rather than the basis of individual steps in the process of production, and the technology of the guild system was predominantly handicraft. As a result of these two factors, labor in the guild was relatively unspecialized, unroutinized, unstandardized and unmechanized. The social relations at work in the guilds were not based directly on the productive process so much as they were based on the structure and values of the guild organization. To sum up, the social relations at work in the guild system resembled those of a small, well-knit community. These relations were primary in nature, that is, worker interacted in a myriad of face-to-face relationship with other workers who are well known to him. In the guild system, it was difficult to treat each other expediently as means to other ends, as commodities. The decline of guild system. By the 16th century, the guild system was showing signs of decay. There were various operating to weaken the guild system. The harmony of the system was gradually destroyed by increasing difficulty in attaining the rank of master. The result was the formation of classes of journeymen opposed to the masters. The bitter strife which followed led to the intervention of town authorities in guild affairs and the weakening of autonomy and power. The very strength of the guild and their monopoly in certain areas of manufacturing aroused the hostility of other groups in society. Eventually, these hostile groups were able to use the state to strike at the guilds. The masters who became wealthy gained control over techniques, tools, quality of product and traditional guild practices. Since those who are controlled the guilds were interested in producing as cheaply and as quickly as possible, one of the major supporters for the stability of the guild system was lost. As the wealth accumulated in the hands of certain masters, some craft guilds were transformed into merchant guilds. Two opposite processes then resulted, both of them equally destructive of the guild system. As the market for manufactured goods, particularly overseas, widened gradually, the guilds became dependent on the exporting merchants. The guilds were reduced to the position of manufacturing not for a market but for an entrepreneur. Beginning with the 16th century, widening horizons and increasing trade led to a demand for new products, often necessitated expensive imported raw materials, entailing increased costs. The person with capital who procures raw material and find a place for finished products control the process of production. Thus, the guild workers became, in effect, employees of a merchant entrepreneur. Thus, through a combination of external, social, political and economic factors as well as through its own internal weakness, the guild system gradually decayed. The putting out system. When the guild system disintegrated, a kind of pro-capitalism arose. The new system of production is known as the putting out system, sometimes the domestic system. This system appeared as early as the 13th century in the English woolen industry, but its greatest development was between the middle of the 15th and the middle of the 18th century. Thus, it existed side by side with both the guild system and the factory system. Guild system, which was thought to be cumbersome and inflexible, workers would work from home manufacturing individual articles from raw materials, then bring them to a central place of business such as a marketplace or a larger town to be assembled and sold. The raw materials were often provided by merchant who received the finished product, hence the synonymous term putting out system. The worker in the putting out system usually owned his tools, which were simple and inexpensive. Sometimes the merchant supplied tools to the worker, and in this case the worker was entirely separated from the means of production. Whether or not the merchant entrepreneur owned the tools of production, he almost always supplied the raw material and owned completely the finished product. In the putting out system, the formal relations of production departed sharply from those of the guild. The only classes in the putting out system were workers or entire family of workers on the one hand and merchant entrepreneurs on the other. The worker was related to the entrepreneur solely through a caste nexus, that is, the worker received wages from the entrepreneur while the entrepreneur received the completed product from the worker. Unlike the journeyman or apprentice, the worker of the putting out system was not bound to a master by guide like regulations. The sole obligations of the merchant and the worker to each other were contractual. The formal relations of production became increasingly capitalistic in nature. From the point of view of the merchant, the putting out system was grossly inefficient. It was extremely difficult to supervise the labor of scattered workers, and there was great loss through waste and embezzlement. Furthermore, the labor supply was uncertain and shifting. Under these circumstances, the merchant tried to control the worker in several ways. One device was to keep the peasant firmly bound in a chain of debt. Another was to deprive him of ownership of the tools of production. In the latter case, the worker was forced to rent the tools from the merchant and was reduced in effect to a completely dependent employee. While the formal relations of production were gradually moving towards a capitalistic form, the social relations of work resembled those of the guild system or the peasant family. Work was either conducted in the old guild shop or the worker rent a machine in the employer's own workshop. In this latter case, the worker was not bound by factory discipline or factory legislation. More often, work was performed at home and usually the productive process became a family affair. As in the case of the guild system, a good deal of nostalgia has been expanded on the putting out system. An idealized picture has been drawn of the patriarch of the family, helped by his sturdy son and industrious wife and daughters, maintaining economic independence, half farmer and half worker. Actually, the putting out system was often the product of economic desperation and in turn produced further economic deprivation. The place of work was frequently an unhealthy cottage with little sunshine or air. The main and sometimes only room served as kitchen and workshop. Furthermore, the putting out system often led to the merciless exploitation of women and children. From the point of view of the entrepreneur, the social relations of work in the putting out system had serious defects. Transporting materials at various stages in the productive process results in waste of time and wastage of materials. Supervision also became a tiresome process. Still further, this productive system imposed great obstacles to the division of labor and the introduction of new machinery. Thus, it was almost impossible for the entrepreneur to cut cost or to increase production. As the demand for goods continued to grow and as the call for better quality was heard, the merchant capitalist began to cast about for better systems of production. By the time this happened, the formal relations of the guild system had been completely shattered. It was now necessary only to revolutionize the social relations at work. The factory system. The factory system was a method of manufacturing first adopted in England at the beginning of the Industrial Revolution in the 1750s and later spread abroad in order to meet the increased demands. The entrepreneur attempted to extend his control over production in several ways. The most successful in the long run was to separate the place of work from the household and to bring the workers together in a central place under one roof. The means of production were completely in the hands of the entrepreneur, who had invested capital in tools, plant, raw materials and labor. A factory is a shop industry with free labor and fixed capital. Causes and conditions of the rise of the factory system. The factory system of production was destined to sweep almost all before it. It came about because of a combination of economic causes and of favorable external conditions, which enabled it to overcome severe obstacles first in England and then elsewhere. Satisfaction of a growing dependable market implied the need for a dependable, efficient system of production. The fact that the guild system was decaying internally and losing power externally was another factor in the rise of industrialism. Another necessary condition for the growth of industrialism was the destruction of the social relationship of feudalism. Still another necessary condition for the establishment of the new industrial system was the creation of large amounts of capital available for investment. Favorable political condition also played a role in the development of the factory system. As industry grew in power, it lent support to the state and the alliance between these two forces was cemented. The factory system was the outcome and embodiment of a rational view of life. The factory system was based on a rational technique of production, rational accounting and rational rules of operation. All these causes and conditions and undoubted many more besides operate jointly to favor the rise of the factory system. The entrepreneur. The entrepreneur or manager owned all the physical means of production. The goods which were produced by factory also belonged solely to the entrepreneur, to be used either for personal needs or speculation or for sale. The worker. The factory system created a special type of worker who was formerly free from compulsory ties to lord or master, that he owed no man's servitude or labor. He could offer his services to any man at any type of work. Due to the entrepreneur's appropriation of the means of production, the worker became more dependent on the economic activity and whims of the entrepreneur. These formal relations of production were impersonal and universalistic to an extraordinary degree. Workers and employers were bound to each other only through a caste nexus. Summary. The various systems of production, the social relations in each system and of the development of one system into another were discussed in this chapter. Industry may be simple transformative when simple tools are used, and the social relations are similar to family relations. It became complex transformative with sophisticated tools and more formal and complex social relations at work.